Okay, so we're here on page 11. It's in the booklet. So he explained, what does it mean when we say Havayahu Elokim? Havaya, which is the name of Hashem that reveals godliness, and Elokim, which is the name of Hashem that conceals godliness. How can we say that it's one? So he explained it in two stages. The first stage was that using a mashal of a Rab and a Talmud, a teacher and a student. Teacher that's in a different caliber than the student. And this Rab understands the concept on a very deep, abstract level. And the only way that he could communicate this concept to the student is by concealing it in a mashal. So even though on the surface it appears that the mashal is concealment, in other words, the mashal is withholding his wisdom from the student, in reality is not withholding, it's just the opposite, that the purpose is to reveal, not to withhold. Because if he would reveal to the student the concept the way he understands it, then it wouldn't be possible for the student to get it. In fact, the student would be totally confused and overwhelmed. And the only way that he can even impart part of the concept, or at least the superficial part of the concept, is by hiding all the depth, concealing all the depth, and then he could reveal to the student that he should understand at least the way things are on the outside. So being that the purpose is that the student should be able to get at least a little bit of the idea, it's considered that what really defines the mashal, not concealment, but revealing, because that's its purpose. And then the second stage was that in essence, not only is the purpose that the student should get a little bit of the concept, but ultimately through the mashal, eventually the student can come to get the whole concept, the pneumius of the concept. Because it says that after 40 years, even this student could reach the point where he can understand fully what his teacher taught him. So that means that the mashal is only a means to an end. And what is the end? The end is to reveal and to communicate and to transmit all the depth that he has. But the only way to do it is by hiding it. So therefore, hiding it is not really hiding it, it's not withholding, but it's actually the way that he's transmitting and revealing, not withholding. Okay. And remember, we also added yesterday that how do you define something, not the way it appears on the outside, or the way it appears, what is it doing technically, but what its purpose is. We understand the purpose, like the Rebbe explains in many sikhs about a mechitza, not only mechitza in a shul, but all the mechitzas in Torah, where there are partitions, whether it's partitions between Yidden and non-Jews, whether it's partitions between Kohanim and Leviim, partitions between men and women, all these partitions in Torah, even though technically it's a partition, but the purpose is actually to unite and bring together two people, or two elements, or two inyanim, that otherwise cannot really come together, or the fact that there is something separating between them that allows them to come together in a constructive way. That's the union of a mechitza. So, and therefore, by definition, it's not to separate it. On the contrary, it's to bring things together. Okay, so now we're going to start with page 11 here in this booklet. To explain it further, it goes, in order to explain it further, it's necessary first to explain the union of nisyonis, of tests. Now we're coming to our subject. Again, you'll see things here that are familiar from the first mimer, from the second mimer. It's written, Hashem is testing you. That from above they test the person to see if will stand up to the test. With it is necessary to understand what is the divine purpose, intent, and in making these tests. And the question is obvious. Hashem knows without a test what's going on in my mind and my heart. Page 12. So there's other places where it explains the whole tachlis and neshama beguv, that the purpose, why the neshama came down into the body, because really the neshama coming down into the body is a tremendous descent. She yurida gedela. Before the neshama descends into the body, what was going on? The neshama was standing in a very high world. The neshama was in Gan Eden. In Gan Eden itself, there are two levels. One is the upper Gan Eden, one is the lower Gan Eden. And it actually explained in other places, not just two levels. In every world, in every area, there are basically two Gan Eden, one higher and one lower. So therefore, it doesn't matter whether it's the higher one or the lower one, wherever it is, it's a spiritual world. As it's known, the Hasidic interpretation to the words me'ayim basa. There's a Mishnah where it says the person should stop and think, me'ayim basa, where do you come from? And goes on to explaining it on a physical level. But the deeper meaning of those words are not a question, but stating a fact. Ma'ayim basa, that where does the neshama come from? A place of ayim. Ayim is where there's no yeshuv, there's no separation of Hashem. Everything is ayim. There's nothing else that exists other than Hashem. The neshama was able to understand and perceive godliness. And the neshama was standing with love and fear of Hashem. The neshama was totally one with Hashem, total bittul. There's no sense of separateness, independence, anything that separates us from Hashem. As it says, Chai Havaya Asher Amarati Lefanov. There's a pasuk where the Navi says, he swore in the name of Hashem, and he said, I swear in the name of Hashem that I stood before him. Past tense. So what does that mean? I stood before him. Did he mean Hashem that I always stand in front of him? And it's not past tense. Then we should say Hashem that I'm always in his presence, or he's always in my presence. It's referring to when the neshama was up in Shamayim before it came down. And why does it say the neshama was standing there? Why Lashon standing? That means the Lamaila in Shamayim, there's no sitting and there's no standing. That's something physical. So obviously it's a metaphor. It's a figurative term. And what does it mean? Another place it explains that standing means bittul. In other words, standing means where everything comes to a stand, stops. that there's no me, it's only Hashem. Yeah.
When it talks about how our neshama is a piece of Hashem, literally, does it mean that our neshama was just completely bittul to Hashem, or it actually was part of Hashem's innermost essence?
It depends how far back you go. All the way up, it was part of Hashem's essence.
Over everything.
Right, but generally speaking, when we say the neshama was part of Hashem, it means once the neshama, even to kind of an identity as the neshama, it was totally bittul to Hashem. Yes, it has an identity, but it's the identity is that it's one with Hashem, even though it has its individual identity. So that's what the neshama was. The yard of Seisa Madreg is then the neshama descends, but Elam Hazeh descends step by step, and each step is the neshama gets more hidden than the step before. Gets very far from Hashem's light. It could no longer perceive godliness the way it was able to perceive godliness before. Because the godly light, the way the godly light shines in this world is the tachlis at tzimtzum v'helam, is the epitome of tzimtzum, the most of tzimtzum. It's only a reflection of something very external down here, which means, first of all, the level of godliness, even if the neshama would be able to perceive it, would be insignificant compared to the level of godliness that the neshama perceives up there, because we know that higher up, the godly light is a higher light. In addition to the fact that the light itself is of a lesser degree, there's another thing. Even whatever I do understand, is that understanding is so much different in the sense that it's not refined the way I understand it up there, because the neshama is in a body, and because the neshama is in a body, and everything that I understand goes through a physical brain, so therefore it's much more coarse. My understanding, it's like saying a mushal, you have two lights. One light gives off 1,000 watts, and the other light gives off 60 watts. So you can't compare. Then you take the one that's 60 watts and you put it in a case of tinted glass, which means in addition to the fact that the light itself is weaker, it's also surrounded by something that dims the light even more. That's the same with the neshama. That first of all, the light of Hashem down here is much of a lesser level than the light that's up there. And second of all, because we're perceiving godliness through the physical body, everything is so much less and weaker and more coarse because we're grasping it through the physical body. And therefore, he's describing the descent. It's totally nothing, you can't even compare it to the spiritual perception of the godly light. I know this means that we just spelled it out, that there's two things that makes the difference, that distinguishes between what the neshama experiences up there or down here. Number one, first of all, the light itself is a much higher light up there, more than the light that shines down here. And the second thing is, over there, the light is more pure. It's not being concealed and dimmed by anything. It's a spiritual light. And here, the fact that I perceive godliness through the physical body, through the physical brain, and everything is through the physical heart. Therefore, whatever I perceive is so much more coarse than and further from the real essence of it than it was up there. So if that's the difference in our perception, it also affects and makes a difference in the love and fear of Hashem that the neshama experiences. And therefore, so even a person that's living this life down here as a spiritual person, davening and learning, and he's a person who has true emotions for Hashem, love for Hashem, and fear and awe, but you still cannot compare it to what was up there. Because if the understanding of Hashem is less, then the love and fear of Hashem is also less, because the emotions are born out of the intellect. So the intellect is weaker, then the emotions are going to be weaker. So the love and fear of Hashem is also not the same. After all that, we're still not finished, Lebach, with the poor neshama. And on top of that, has to upon him. On top of that, there's more concealments. There are things out there in the world that conceal godliness. On top of the fact that I myself, what's revealed to me is less than what's up there, and that my physical body interferes with seeing the concept and the understanding of Hashem in its purest form. On top of that, things are happening constantly around us which conceal godliness. When we see wicked people prospering and we see wicked people being able to do evil and good people suffering, all these things are things that interfere with, it's all concealing godliness. And tzarech liga harbe, a person has to really work hard. There's a lot of hard labor involved. That he should really be able to feel and sense the godly light. So koza you read it. This is such a tremendous descent. What? Yeah, because before it comes down, there's no concept what's going to happen. No. Right, the neshama waits because ultimately this is the purpose of this gives Hashem the biggest nachas. This is the gives Hashem pleasure. It's like a person goes on shlichus. So I'm not going to have a shul there. I'm not going to have a mikveh there. I'm not going to have easy access to kosher food. I mean, today the world is different, but in certain places, and years ago it was all the places, it's going to be so much more difficult. My children won't have a yeshiva to go with other children who daven, learn, and keep Shabbos. But I'm going there because I know that's the ultimate purpose I would need to fulfill. Same with the neshama.
But the neshama doesn't forget past lives, so really it knows what it means to be out there.
It depends. The inner part of the neshama doesn't forget, but the part of the neshama that I'm conscious of forgot. In other words, I don't feel it.
Right, I'm not talking about from like my perspective, I'm talking about from perspective when it goes up.
Right, but when you say my, who's my, it's also the neshama, but that's the conscious part of the neshama. So the truth is, there is a part of the neshama that remembers, and there's a deeper part of the neshama that doesn't feel that descent so much. But the part of the neshama that we are conscious of really is affected by this descent. And it's a big descent. So the question is, why would Hashem do that to the neshama? Yeah.
Why is there the Mishnah that says against your will you'll live and against your will you'll die? I get confused with the idea like your neshama knows it should go down, but then it also doesn't want to leave Hashem.
You're being in the Mashiach class today. You'll hear an answer. It's on the agenda. Okay. But anyway, I just want to say, I wanted to just mention, that's the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, where it says, first of all, it says the person is born against their will, and then it says the person passes away against their will. So which ones does the neshama want? To be up there, to be down here?
Both.
Then there's another Mishnah that says that one moment in that world is more pleasure than a whole lifetime. Even a person will live a whole lifetime of pleasure, every second, pleasure, 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 pleasure. A whole lifetime couldn't compare to one moment of pleasure in that world.
But one mitzvah in this world.
And then it says, and one mitzvah in this world is infinitely greater than a whole lifetime of pleasure in that world. So obviously it means there's certain advantage there that we don't have here. And that is that over there Hashem is more revealed. And there's certain advantages we have here. Here we connect to Hashem's essence. And that's why the neshama wants to come down, in spite of the fact that it's a descent. Well, what he's going to explain now, that the main sort of, the main thing that brings the neshama to connect to Hashem's essence is the fact that it's doing its avodah through challenges, through the nisyonos. That's the purpose. Yes?
So when it says a person must labor greatly to love and fear of God on earth, is it the animal soul that must labor greatly, the sama, both together?
When it says that a person must what?
Labor greatly?
Yeah.
So which part of us must labor greatly?
The neshama also, because the neshama is held, in a sense, surrounded by the animal soul, and the animal soul is surrounded by the physical body, So the neshama can't express itself. It's like taking Chas v'shalom a person, tying him up and then putting him into a bag and not letting him express himself. It's very painful. So the neshama might have all these things, but it can't exercise anything here with the nefesh Bahamas and the guf blocking. And if it does, it has to work very hard. So the ultimate purpose why Hashem did this, and especially in some Mamar Mah Tovu, Hashem is the epitome of kindness. So why does he do something to the neshama, which is the opposite of kindness? The whole purpose is in order to experiencing a test. The test Shaboim La'adam, Shein Mepkin Hester, part of these tests, which are concealments. And that's the purpose. For example, Bistalkus Chayes Hashefa, if God forbid the hashpa, the sustenance that Hashem gives a person is discontinues to flow, either through maniyas brius haguf, either if God forbid the body is not healthy, a maniyas mammon, or the person doesn't have the money that they need to provide for all their needs. The purpose is to hide Hashem's holiness, and in order to block a person and prevent him from inside and outside, the person wants to come closer to Hashem through davening and through learning, and these things are blocking him. But the reason why they're blocking him, the purpose is not chas v'shalom to block him in reality, but sheyamed b'nisayin neged kol menei u'makev, that he should overcome the nisayin. V'shvul zeh hoyitachlis hayirida shel neshama, and that is the ultimate purpose for the neshama coming down to this world. Because through this, the neshama will reach and the neshama will achieve something which is so much greater than what it had before, even greater than what it had before up there. Otherwise, it wouldn't go down. It can't be greater than what it has down here. Then why did it go down? It must be that it's going to be greater than what the neshama had up there before. Right. So that's why I'm saying if chas v'shalom a person is not healthy, it makes is capable of creating the distance between Hashem. Like, why is Hashem doing this to me? Hashem is good, Hashem is kind. And especially if I did a mitzvah today or I gave tzedakah today, why is this happening? These are all tests. Yeah.
If your neshama is coming from the innermost, deepest parts of Hashem, how could you say something that's going to ever go higher? Like, I know at a certain point it goes lower and there's like a descent for the sake of an ascent, but if it started in the highest place, there's no way it would go higher.
First of all, there's infinite levels up there. And I guess it means once the neshama is in Gan Eden, I guess there's a certain, like I mentioned before when you asked me the question, there's a certain point when the neshama is like still included in Hashem, doesn't even have any kind of sense of individual soul. Once it gets the sense of an individual soul, that's the point where the neshama could be identified as an entity and has its own identity. And that's usually in the world of Atzilus, or the world of Bria, the world of Tzia. Wherever it is, it could always go higher from that point on. Remember we spoke about, that was also Mashiach. But when Mashiach comes, will be infinite level because Hashem is infinite. So no matter how, the neshama could be connected to the highest level, but what it'll feel consciously, there could be thousands of levels of what it, an infinite level, what it would feel consciously in terms of perceiving and feeling Hashem's presence. Well, turn to page 14. So we need to understand how is it that Dafka, through this method, the neshama could reach a higher level. What's the connection? I just wanted to say the class of the Nishmas, Avram than Yitzchak. So how did the neshama reach a higher level? Who the Inyan and the Sionis, Hina Lomas Vestadim, Shimalim Mastirim Alo Emes. Definition of Nisayon is concealment, something which conceals the emes, conceals the truth. If a person would recognize the emes, as it is, that the whole purpose here is to make me closer to Hashem, it wouldn't be a Nisayon. So the definition of a Nisayon is where the truth and the true purpose of it is hidden. Kim calling in a Nisayon, then it hides the truth by only through overcoming. For example, page 15. Let's take, for example, the Nisayon of Avram Avinu. He was thrown into a Ur-Kazdan, he was thrown into a burning fire. And why did they do that? Because Nimrod was the king then, that he considered himself a god, and he had people bowing down to him as a god. And Abraham Avinu was the only one that was in defiance, and he broke all the idols, as we all know the story. And he said to him that he should give up his ideas and bow down to this king. And Abraham Avinu said no. And then they threatened him that if not, they'll throw him into the fire. So he says like this: Hula Yoda, Avram did not know that he's not going to be consumed by the fire. Shimha Yudei, if he knew in advance, that it won't be burned by the fire. Let's assume Avram Avinu was a Navi, because he was a Navi. But let's say that as a Navi, he would have known that they can throw him into the fire, but he's going to come out unharmed. If he would have known that, it wouldn't be a test. Yeah.
By the Akeda, he knew that Yitzhak was going to be a great father and need many generations, but it's considered one of his tests.
Right, but he didn't know that Yitzhak won't be slaughtered.
If he knew that Yitzhak was going to be a great father, he knew that Yitzhak wasn't going to die.
No, he didn't.
He didn't.
No, that's why it was a test. Hashem told him to slaughter him.
But there was that whole idea that he did know, and like despite that, he still had B'tachan and Hashem that somehow it was going to.
No, I said something else. I said that even though Hashem told him that Yitzhak will be a father of a great nation, and that'll be your future, nevertheless, it didn't create any conflict in his mind and any doubts in his mind. But how's Hashem telling him to bring him to the Akeda? What I said in class was that in Mefarshim, I try to see how did he reconcile the two things in his head. Now you could say he was thinking he's going to shech Yitzchak, then Hashem will do Tchiyas HaMesim.
Still not.
No, but that's a question and an answer. But what I said in class was that he had no question in the first place. It's not that he worked it out in his head how Hashem is going to do both things. He just knew one thing, that Hashem told him to shech Yitzchak, and he had no idea that it's not going to happen in actuality. So how did he reconcile? He said to himself, I don't have to reconcile. Whatever Hashem said is emes, and I don't have to know how to figure out how it's going to be. I just know what Hashem is emes, and I know to listen to what Hashem tells me to do now. So the same thing with the fire. He didn't know that he's going to come out alive. If he knew he'd come out alive, it wouldn't have been a test. In other words, imagine Hashem say to him, Avram, don't worry about Nimrod, this is only a test. Then it's not a test. It's like playing hide and seek and telling the other guy, I want you to know where I'm hiding, but see if you can find me. If you're telling you that where you're hiding, of course they'll find you. The game is over. I watch the little kids playing sometimes. They're hiding somewhere. They scream from the hiding place, okay, you can come now to find me. Really find it right away. He didn't know this. He thought for sure the fire would consume him. Because that's the nature of fire. Fire consumes. And therefore, what was he thinking? He was thinking that no matter what, even if the fire is going to do that, he's ready to give up his life for Hashem. And by the way, the Mesiras Nefesh here is also not just physically to give up his life. This is similar to what I mentioned the other day, the question that I asked about the Frierdiker Rebbe. He could have said to himself, maybe I should make believe that I'm doing this, because if Nimrod is going to kill him, who's going to spread Hashem's name in the world after that? So he could have easily thought, because of a spiritual reason, it's much better to pretend, and then later I'll go out and keep doing what I did before. And the answer is, Mesiras Nefesh means taking a different kind of route. I'm transcending Seichel. I'm not going with Seichel. I just know that there's no way in the world that I can bow down to an idol, and nothing in the world is going to stop me from doing that. And therefore, he went straight ahead, even though he knew that this would cost his life. Omnam you do it, but it's no. Now we're going to explain. So what happened here? That Teva b'gematria Elokim. The word Teva is b'gematria Elokim, as we know. Hainu shekol had the boy sheba'olam means all the laws of nature in the world. They all come from Hashem. The Shem Elokim, it comes from the name Elokim, which is a garment that conceals Hashem's presence. Through this name Elokim, that's a riboy, his chalkus v'hagbala. That's where all the differences come in this world. All the limitations come to this world. That everything in the world has its nature, and it can't function any other way. Eish, Seir, for example, fire burns, and mayim yichabe, and water extinguishes fire. In other words, the fact that water can burn that's the nature, that's the limitation that Hashem gave the water. That water functions this way, fire functions a different way, and the same thing with all the other things in creation. But that comes from Shem Elokim, and therefore it looks like there's a certain hard, nature, rock core nature, that this is the way things are, and it's not changeable. But from the perspective of Shem Havaya, the name of Hashem, which is above nature, there's no limitations. There is no limitations, and there are no differences between fire and water. The Yochali is, in fact, if the light of Hashem that's infinite comes into action, then the opposite could happen. Mayim lo yichaber, veish lo yisred. Mayim won't, not the opposite. It could be that Mayim won't extinguish fire, and the fire won't do any burning. Like the story in Gemara, with Chanina ben Daisa, and we also had that in the Maimer, that his daughter said, we have no oil, and we can't light Shabbos candles. And he said to us, I use vinegar. The same God that said that oil should burn, he can make vinegar burn. In other words, this substance has a certain nature only because of Shem Elokim. But in essence, no substance is really limited from Shem Havaya. So if Shem Havaya is revealed, vinegar could burn just like oil. And same thing as the pasuk. There's a pasuk we all saying in the heavens. Who's he making peace between? So the Gemara says there's angels. Michael, there's an angel called Michael. He's Sar Shamayim. He's the minister in charge of the water. In other words, all the water comes from Malach Michael. Gabriel is the Sar Shalesh. He's the minister of fire. And generally, in language of Chassidus, Michael is Chesed, and Gabriel is Gevura. Ve'ena Mechabim Zeh Zeh. Hashem makes peace up there. That fire and water, which normally can coexist together, up there, they're living together peacefully. Which means that I would think the opposite. If fire burns and water extinguishes fire, when you go to the source of fire and the source of water, where everything is so much stronger, then for sure they should, destroy one another. And after there, it's shalom. Why? Because from Shem Havaya, there is no limitations. Fire doesn't have to burn, and water doesn't have to extinguish, and like the water when they split the sea could stand, etc. Not only that, but sometimes we find something even greater. We have a story in Tanakh where the water actually consumed, the fire consumed the water. They start with Eliyahu Navi. That in his time there were a lot of false prophets, Navi Abal, and in fact there weren't any more true prophets. They were killed, and those that were left were in hiding. So the only prophets that were functioning were the false prophets. And most of the Jews in that time were actually following these false prophets. They had an avodah zarah called Baal, and they followed them. So came a time where there was Eliyahu Navi said to the king, who was one of the people following those prophets, he said, let's have a test and see who's true and who's false. And the test was, they went on a mountain called Har Carmel, and Eliyahu Navi said, you guys build a mizbeach, and I'll build a mizbeach, and don't put any fire on it. I'll pray to Hashem that he should create a fire even though I didn't light one. And you pray to your gods that they should light a fire. And let's see who's emes. Whichever one, wherever it happens, that's the emes. So hundreds of thousands of Yidden gathered to see this showdown. They built their mizbeach. He built his mizbeach. And it says that they told him to go first. And they were praying and jumping and doing all sorts of crazy things that they usually do, and there was no fire. And it says, interesting, how the Navi was teasing them, said, maybe he's sleeping, screaming a little bit louder, maybe your God is sleeping, maybe he's tired, maybe his ears aren't working today. What really happened was, the Gemara says, what were they thinking? They knew that it's all Baba my sister, what were they thinking? The Gemara says that they had two people hiding under the altar, and when he would be praying for fire from underneath, they would light a fire, and people would think that it came from heaven. The Abishah sent the snake. The snake was a poisonous snake, so they were finished, and therefore there was no fire. After they gave up, he said, okay, now he davened mincha, it says, and then not only that he didn't light a fire, he poured water all over the mizbeach. And then he davened, and the fire came down. And the water extinguished, no, the fire consumed the water. The opposite of what the nature is. And then it says that all the Yidden shouted together, Hashem hu Elokim, twice, Hashem hu Elokim, and there was a big change that people started to believe in Hashem. By the way, it has nothing to do with this class, but this, by the way, to understand a little bit better what's going on today, where people are confused and asking questions, there's a medrash that says that before Mashiach comes, there can be very big tests. It'll be very hard to believe what you're supposed to believe. Those things will look the opposite. And in one place it says that imagine if Eliyahu Navi did what he did, and instead of the fire going down on his side, it went down on the other side. Did you imagine what kind of test that would have been? And the Navi says, let's prove it. You'll see. And instead of working out this way, it worked out the other way. Their mizbeach had some sort of a fire appeared, and by him, no fire appeared. So that's the kind of test that's going to be before Mashiach comes. Almost impossible to hold on to your belief. But those who are connected to tzaddikim will be able to have their belief strong and not lose it. So we see that there is no absolute nature. All the laws of nature are almost like attached to the article, to the object, by Shem Elokim. Shem Havaya is not limited to those laws of nature. Yeah.
When is someone supposed to know when to do something according to nature and when kind of like serve pasta and
so there's a Gemara, should not rely on miracles, which means back here there had to be a miracle. In other words, the Avraham Avinu, he was ready to give up his life. That's a different story. But that means in general, if a person, let's say, is not feeling well, they can't say Hashem is above nature and he's not limited. So therefore, no matter what the doctors say, nothing's going to happen. So I'm going to continue learning. I'll give more tzedakah, and I won't do anything about it. That's not okay, because Hashem wants us to do things in the natural order. Why? That'll also be explained in this mind. Why is it so important? What does Hashem care if it won't be in the natural order? It was so good in the Midbar, they had miracles, food from Shemayim, and they had water from heavenly, miraculous water and they had the Anan and the clouds protecting them. Why would Hashem care that we would have that now as well? So that's also explained based on what it says in the Smayim. On the other hand, if there's a situation that's happening and I'm supposed to have bitachon in Hashem, how can I have bitachon if according to nature this can't happen? That's when the miracles comes into play. I have bitachon, Hashem is above nature. But when the question is initially, how do I conduct myself? I have to conduct myself in a way that's according to Torah. That's my guide. And if I'm worried, how am I going to survive? The answer is Hashem is not limited to the laws of nature. That's the answer. Okay, to be continued from here. Good Shabbos, everybody. Okay. Well, Rabbi, everybody.
Yes, no worries. North State, I showed it, it was like I was. You know, it's out. We know that managed to go to work. People are gonna come out of border. And then was you saw her, oh, Miss, I know, out here. Yeah.